Bonsoir à tous. La séance débutera dans quelques instants. Good evening, everyone. The public session will start in a few minutes. Thank you. Bonsoir à tous. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this information session regarding the project Safe Route to School, City Hall Area. Bonsoir à tous. Bienvenue à cette séance d'information publique concernant le projet sécuriser, les trajets scolaires dans le secteur de l'hôtel de ville. Je me présente, mon nom est Stacy Maignan. I'm Stacy Maignan and I am the Ed Division of Communications for the City of Westmount. I will be your mentor this evening. Donc, j'aurai le plaisir d'animer cette séance ce soir. Tonight, we will be presenting the Safe Route to School project of the City Hall. We will explain you the procedures, the measures, and we will answer to your questions. Veuillez noter que la rencontre de ce soir est enregistrée. So please note that tonight's meeting will be recorded and will be shared on the Citizen Portal. Donc, avant de débuter, j'aimerais vous donner quelques petites indications pour l'utilisation de la plateforme Zoom. So before beginning, I would like to give you some guidelines to be able to use the Zoom platform. So now all the participants are currently muted to help the meeting run smoothly. Afin de faciliter le déroulement de la rencontre, tous les participants sont actuellement en mode sourdine. Dans la section au bas de votre écran, dans le chat, vous allez voir, nous avons indiqué les directives comment vous seriez en mesure de poser vos questions. Donc, pour vos questions de fond et de contenu, vous pouvez utiliser l'onglet QR, or in English, it's Q&A, so question and answers. So you'll be able to type your question there. Donc, vous allez être en mesure de taper votre question dans cette section-ci, dans le module. Mais par contre, toutes les questions de fond vont être répondues soit par écrit ou à l'oral. Donc, notre équipe sera en mesure de sélectionner quelques questions et nous allons pouvoir partager le tout avec vous. Mais soyez sans crainte, nous allons aussi faire une synthèse des questions qui sera publiée sur notre portail citoyen. Toutes les directives se trouvent au bas de l'écran dans la section chat. So you'll be able to get all the directions in the chat section. Also, if you have any technical problems, you can also use the chat box to be able to send us a message. For example, if you can't hear me, or if you can't hear anyone, you can't see the video, you have a technical problem, you'll be able to send us a message and we'll be able to help you. Donc, passons maintenant au déroulement de la soirée. Donc, comme vous pouvez voir à l'écran, nous sommes en période de l'introduction. Donc, il y aura l'introduction actuellement. Par la suite, vous aurez un mot de vos élus, donc un mot de bienvenue de nos porte-paroles. Il y aura la présentation du projet et la période de questions. So now we're at the introduction. It will be the welcome remarks from our two spokespersons, two municipal councilors. Also, we will present you the project. You will have a question period, and it will be the closing statement. Donc maintenant, déjà, passons au mot de bienvenue de nos élus. Donc, comme je disais plus tôt, pour ce projet, nous avons 2 membres du conseil municipal qui agissent à titre de porte-parole. Donc, nous avons monsieur le councilor Jeff Chamy, qui est conseiller du district 3, dont le projet touche une bonne partie du territoire. Il est aussi commissaire aux travaux publics, à l'accessibilité et à la mobilité, et président de la commission des finances et de l'administration. Notre deuxième porte-parole, monsieur Jonathan Chomsky, il est du district 2, et puis il est aussi, he is also, Commissioner of Economics Development, Infrastructure and Information Technology. So now I would like to invite the elected official serving as spokesperson for this project to share a few opening remarks. Councillor Chamy, over to you.
Thank you, Stacy. Good evening, mesdames et messieurs. Merci beaucoup d'être avec nous ce soir. Thank you for being here this evening. As the counselor for District 3, the district directly affected by this project, I know that traffic and road safety are such important concerns for so many of us residents. Depuis plusieurs années, la ville travaille sur ces enjeux de sécurité afin d'améliorer les déplacements dans ce secteur. As many of you know, the city has received concerns from residents, parents, schools about traffic in this area. And our responsibility as your elected officials is to listen, to understand these concerns, and to find solutions that make our streets safer for everyone, especially, ladies and gentlemen, for our children and for the children who use our schools in this vital area and who travel through the school zone every day. The goal of this project is very simple. It's to make these streets safer, slow down the traffic, reduce the traffic, and create a more predictable environment for everyone. Ce soir, nous souhaitons vous présenter les objectifs du projet et les mesures proposées, tout en étant à l'écoute de vos questions et vos commentaires. We thank you for your presence. We're grateful for the great turnout tonight, the interest, the calls, the messages we've received. It's so important, and we're very grateful for your concern. Taking the time to participate this evening. Merci de votre présence. Bonne soirée et à toutes et à tous.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chamy. Councillor Jonathan Chomsky, over to you.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you to everyone for being here this evening. As Commissioner for Economic Development, Infrastructure, and Information Technology, I believe it is important that projects like this be developed through careful analysis, technical expertise, and a clear vision for the future of our community. The measures you will see this evening are based on traffic studies, technical assessments, and collaboration with many partners, including schools and transportation experts. The objective of this project is simple: to create a safer school zone, to make it safer and easier for children to get to and from school while improving safety and comfort for everyone who uses these streets. Nous voulons des solutions concrètes fondées sur les réalités du terrain et sur l'expertise de spécialistes, afin de rendre nos rues plus sécuritaires pour tous les usagers. This evening is an opportunity to better understand the work that has been done, the objectives of the project, and the measures being proposed. We hope it will also be an opportunity for a constructive and respectful dialogue. With that, I now invite the project team to present the project and walk you through the proposed measures. Thank you. Merci à toutes et à tous.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chomsky. Merci beaucoup pour vos interventions. J'aimerais aussi vous dire qu'il y a d'autres membres du conseil municipal qui sont présents parmi nous, donc je vais les nommer. So we also have other member of the municipal council who's with us tonight. So we have Matt Harrison, we have Mr. Sean Moss, we have Mrs. Kathleen Kez, and we have Mr. Paul Levine. So thank you very much for being with us. Donc, comme vous pouvez voir à l'écran, voici les intervenants dans la première partie de la ville. Donc, pour commencer, vous avez moi-même, Stacy Maignan, comme mentionné plus tôt, chef de division communication. So you have me as your mediator, so I'm the head division of communication, like I mentioned earlier. And we also have Mr. Jonathan Auger, donc qui est chargé de projet. C'est lui qui va vous faire la présentation ce soir. So now, like I was saying, I would like now to invite my colleague, Jonathan Auger, who is the mobility and traffic advisor and also in charge of this project, to be able to explain to you the objective of the project and to walk us through the measures and to guide you to make sure that you understand what we will do with that amazing project, Safe Route to School. So Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stacy. And good evening, everyone. And Good evening, all parents, residents, and all other guests, and even collaborators that are in the chat tonight. It's really a pleasure for me to be here tonight. As some of you may know, the project has been ongoing for quite a few years, or 3 years, and for us, it's a pleasure to actually release the project and explain and to show our work. So it's an immense pleasure for me to do that for you here tonight. Maybe just a few words about myself and about the presentation before starting it. It is going to be a little bit more of a technical presentation, and that's due to the nature of the project. There were a lot of steps. We wanted to make sure we did our homework on this project, and so we went and got a lot of different technical expertises, and we did a lot of different analysis. So the nature of the project is a little bit more of a technical one. In terms of the language of the presentation, it's going to be mostly in English. The slides are bilingual, but just to facilitate and also in terms of time management, we're going to prioritize a little bit more of the English language. I will translate and I will interchange a little bit with the French, but primarily will be in English. A little bit of background on myself, just to put a little bit of context. I've been working for the city for 12 years. It's been a pleasure over those 12 years. One of the dossiers that I would say I take the most interest in is safety. I did do my master's thesis on the topic of pedestrian safety. And so safety has always been an important topic for me in the city of Westmount. And so it's with a lot of pleasure and a lot of rigor that we applied to this project. And so moving on, I would like to start the presentation now with a brief introduction to the study area. First, perhaps just to provide a little bit of context on the presentation itself, there's going to be 4 main sections. There's going to be a little bit of an introduction, there's going to be a context, and also there's going to be, the context is mostly the studies that we undertook, and then there's going to be the project itself, and then the next steps. And of course, after that, there'll be the question period. There are approximately 40 slides to it. I'm expecting that the presentation will last about 30 minutes for the project, but I'll try to keep it between 25 and 30 minutes. Some slides I will go a little bit faster because they're more visuals. So even though it's a little bit of a lengthy presentation, there are some slides that can go a little bit faster. So if you look at your screen in front of you, you have the project area. And what we call, in terms of traffic studies, we generally call this a study area. But it's also, we could also refer to it as the problem area. And in this case, you might ask the question, how did we get here? And to answer that question is, well, everything starts with complaints or concerns raised by residents, parents, in this case, a lot of the schools. And so as a city, we have the responsibility to respond and to investigate and to try to address these concerns and these complaints. And so maybe just a little bit of an explanation to put things into context is that traditionally, in terms of road safety and in particular school safety, there was a large focus on addressing the concerns primarily attached to the school zone itself. But increasingly in active transportation planning and in safety intervention, what we try to do is we try to go a little bit beyond that, which is why you see the title Safe Routes to School, which makes reference more to an overall program that exists to address safety not only directly in front of the school, but on the route to school. Because as many of you might know, if we only address concerns in front of the school zone, we're maybe not addressing issues or safety issues that are on the route. And that might not allow or encourage parents or children to walk independently or bike independently to school. So before kicking off and getting into a little bit of the presentation, we want to ask a little bit of an icebreaker question to everyone in the chat, so we could try to sort of gauge how many of those of you that are here today that are maybe parents that have children that attend schools in this area in particular, And so if you don't mind, if you could just raise your hand so that we could see a show of hands of how many individuals that are in the chat tonight that might have children that attend one of these schools in the area. Because I'm in presentation mode, I don't see a show of hands, but maybe if one of my colleagues could confirm that we got the show of hands and we're okay. Yeah. So moving on, we would also like to ask a follow-up or a complement question is if we could erase all the hands, and now the other question we would like to survey is to see if there are those of you that are in the chat that are more that would identify themselves more as a resident with not necessarily a child that's attending one of the schools in the problem area or the study area, as we might call it. Okay, so thank you very much for participating in that, what we call an icebreaker question. It helps us to get an idea of the audience, and we appreciate your time, you're answering that. Moving on. So as I said earlier, the first slides are going to be a little bit of an introduction of the problem areas. So what we see in the problem area is a heavy or a dense presence of vulnerable road users, as you can see in the images of de Maisonneuve and Kitchener and Metcalfe, which makes reference to Saint-Léon School and Akiva School. So we have an area that's dense or heavily populated by school children that are often walking or biking to school. In some cases, they're driven, but as we'll see on the next slide, and throughout the presentation, there's still a need and there's still a presence of vulnerable road users. Coupled with that, of course, we have a phenomenon or a problem that we observe frequently in these school zones, and that is the one, as you see on the screen, is the problem of U-turns. And so as you can see in the bottom left picture, you have actually a truck that sees that he's stuck by traffic because maybe the bus has his stop signs that are deployed. They can't pass, so then they decide to turn around. So we can see by this truck that it's not necessarily only parents. It could also be people that are trying to transit through, but they see that they're obstructed by the presence of school buses or too much pickup and drop off, and then they do a U-turn. What we also tend to see is what we call curb hopping, or just in general dangerous driving. We have motorists that are driving on the sidewalks. Sometimes it's contractors. So again, we see it's not only parents or residents. Sometimes it could be contractors or through traffic. And it causes motorists to have to go on the sidewalk because there's just insufficient space. And if we look at the pictures in front of you, you have Argyle Avenue. Again, just what we qualify as unwanted friction, or an excess of friction created in these school zones. And so when we take a little bit of a step back, we look at the problem on what you see in front of you is an elevation plan, and it shows the widths of the roads and the lane widths. And what we're confronted with is a problem. The problem is that traditionally in Westmount, we have what we could call a very tight or an overly saturated lane assignment. So basically what it means is that we have too much going on. We have too many parking lanes and too many traffic lanes for the space we have. So at the bottom, what you could see is the prescribed width that you need to have two lanes of traffic and 2 lanes of parking. So it could vary from 11 to 12 meters, but yet what we have on our territory or in the problem area that we're referencing tonight is 8.6 to 9.6 meters. So as you can see by the image that is to scale, it just doesn't fit in that space. And sometimes you can have 2 trucks or 2 SUVs. And we know that in the city of Westmount, there's a tendency to have larger vehicles, which just exacerbates a little bit the problem that we're visualizing on the pictures and on the screen right now. And so what we're what we're qualifying this in terms of the presentation is a little bit of the evaluation phase. So after we received the complaints or the concerns that were raised, then we did a little bit of validation. We looked in the ministry standards. And later on, we're going to explain how we mandated the study so that they could verify these things as well. But initially, we took notice of this, and it's working. There's just not enough space for what we want to do with our roads. And what we also did was we installed traffic counters to understand the phenomena a little better. We did site observation. We also did, we installed radars to determine the speeds. So this is more the evaluation, the initial evaluation phase. And what you see here on the screen is a little bit of a mapping of what we did to arrive at where we are today, because we're still answering the question, how did we get here? And so we presented to you in the previous slides the concerns and the complaints that were raised, the evaluation phase that we did. And now in the next few slides, we're going to present the studies, which is a little bit more about the context. And it's worth reminding that at this point that why the city feels that we need to intervene is because as a city, we have a responsibility to ensure that the roads are safe for all users, but especially our most vulnerable users, which are children and in school zones. So I'm going back to the slide that we've seen initially, just to more formally explain the study area and the objectives of the project. So this, in terms of the study area, what you have is basically it's a hub where there's a lot going on. As we mentioned earlier, there's 5 schools which house 2,500 to 2,800 students who commute there daily during school hours. But you also have another phenomenon going on where it's a hub for traffic. You have a lot of places of worship. You have the SPVM, the fire station, and you also have City Hall. So you have places of employment, and all of these these traffic generators are in competition in a way for vulnerable road user use. So you have a bike path, you have the schools, you have a Bixi station, you have one of the most popular bike path in Montreal, de Maisonneuve, which is not too far. So all of these things create what we could call a competition for space. And when we observed this and we did our initial assessment, we were very alarmed, because when we look at the data, we look at the pictures, we look at the concerns and the complaints, we really see that basically it's motorists that are competing for space with vulnerable road users. So the city felt the need to intervene, and that's why you see here the study area. And the reason why the study area is this area around City Hall is because all the schools raise similar complaints. So there's a common denominator among these schools and the residents or the parents in this area that point to a similar problem. And so in terms of objectives, the objectives of this project are to address the problems in a way. It's very simple in that sense. So it's to improve safety and comfort near schools, support active and independent mobility among children, reduce conflict points and risky maneuvers, create calmer and more predictable traffic, and also reduce through traffic, and also greenhouse gases if we can, because we know that the more trips we could convert to walking and cycling or maybe car sharing, it does good for the city and it does good for the planet. So it's always something we want to do. But before going into the studies, I want to point to some of the collaborators, and in particular in this section, the early collaborators. So on your screen now, you can see 3 main collaborators that helped us in the initiation phase, the study phase. And so in terms of in chronology, based on when we implemented or when we gave these mandates, we have the company Intervia, and from there was Pascal Graton, who was the project lead. He's a traffic engineer. There was also Mark Wilkins Consulting, who helped us with the 2023 perceptions survey. That was a public survey. And there's also Polytechnique, who helped us in this phase, who we turned to go and do a lot of validation. And there were a lot of research questions that we had, so we wanted to validate them with Polytechnic, because as some of you may know, there's not a perfect solution for there's not a solution that you could implement for traffic that is safety with zero risk. So there's always some level of risk, and as you may know, we are going to present to you the proposal of this evening, which, as many of you already know, it's the conversion of some streets to one way. So we really wanted to bring Polytechnic on board so that we could make sure we're doing the right thing. We're not making the situation or safety, we're not going to degrade the safety in any way. So to start off, in terms of the traffic engineering report that was done, and I should say at this point that any one of these studies or mandates could be an hour presentation in itself, and I don't want to do that. So of course, there's a need to sort of synthesize and to go a little bit quickly. And I want to reassure everybody that all the documents are already published, or if not, they will be published very shortly. So you could consult them after the fact. So in terms of the Intervia study, we could divide the conclusions or the mandate in different sections. So the first section, we could call it what we do is we do a diagnostic of the existing situation. And what they found was that the existing roadway was not aligned with school zone design principles. There are several sidewalk gaps that reduce pedestrian network continuity. We're thinking about right here beside City Hall on Kensington Avenue, there's a missing sidewalk directly in a school zone. There's limiting cycling infrastructure despite the presence of multiple schools, documented collision history involving vulnerable road users, and there's narrow roadways, parking friction, school drop-off activity, and the topography that creates recurring operational conflicts. So if we fast forward to the main findings of the report, what we find is that the existing road space is mostly allocated to vehicle movement and parking. Current conditions limit opportunities to improve pedestrian and cycling safety. Several documented safety and accessibility concerns remain unresolved. And when we look at the conclusion that comes out of this, is that the status quo is not optimal for a school zone environment. Existing roadway allocation favors vehicle movement over vulnerable road users, and structural change at this point is warranted. And in terms of what was done in the study is that we analyzed 4 different scenarios. So the study was from 2024 to 2026, and it involved 4 scenarios. If the viewers are interested, you could go and consult the report. I cannot go into details of each scenario, but what I can say is that the scenario that we're putting forward today was based on the recommendation of that report. And it's also a recommendation based on council as well the month of March. In some of the scenarios, you will see that we studied the inclusion of Montrose Avenue. We have since removed Montrose Avenue from what we're proposing today. Moving on, we want to look now at the traffic survey from 2023. I'm not going to read everything that you see on the slide here, but suffice, this is just the introduction card that was sent to residents. And I should say here at this point that the 2023 school zone safety survey was not meant to be a direct consultative tool for residents. It was more an overall tool, but at the same time, in the invitation, we did mention that the feedback that you provide us will guide us into future decisions. So just an overview, and I should say here too that there's a lot of subsets of data or subgroups of data that could be analyzed, and certain trends or certain insights could be made based on that. But of course, at this point for this presentation, we're just looking at the general takeaways, and that applies for all the other studies that I'm going to talk about tonight. Is that we're limiting it to the takeaways and the insights, because Like I said, we could delve into any one of these mandates, and it could be an hour presentation. So there's a need to keep it to the bare bones and to the takeaways. So at a general level, there were 773 respondents. Of those, 550 were parents, 183 non-parents, and another 40 that identified more as employees. So it could be employees of City Hall, or it could be employees of the schools, who we wanted to include because they have a good insight into like the issues and the challenges that the students are facing. So I think the main differences that you'll see among parents and non-parents, there was some variability, but in general, they were relatively similar. So what I'm showing you here, there are some differences, but the percentages of difference are not necessarily marginal, but they're modest. So in terms of parents, there was more of a focus on accessibility and pedestrian infrastructure. So dissatisfaction was lower for those topics. And for non-parents, it was more crossing at intersections and the cycling network. And so in terms of the insights or the takeaways, what we gathered from it is that there's heavy automobile use. There's some schools that have a higher active transportation use, but some schools also have a high level, and that's a little bit normal because you have a lot of private schools, and so you have schools that they live far away, and active mobility is not necessarily an option. Although later on we're going to speak about another option or another intervention measure that we could propose to help that even if parents live far, they can. There are alternative means where we could encourage active transportation. So in terms of the insights, there's an opportunity to convert some of those automobile trips to active, because we noticed in the survey that a lot of people answered living within walking distance but are still driven. But then on the other hand, there's also a need to secure trips or to secure the route to school and school zones for those who are already engaging in active transportation. And as part of the survey, we did present 3 options to the respondents so that they could measure, or so they could give their feedback or the preference on hypothetical scenarios. And 3 scenarios or interventions that the city could implement. And one of the scenarios was that we would do a school street. So what we do in that case is we close the street in front of the school for morning drop-off or arrival and dismissal. It could be once a day, it could be it could be every day, which is a little bit rarer, but it could be once a week, or it could be once a month, or it could just be a one-time event. Or the other option was the removal of parking in order to implement a bike path, because you wouldn't usually remove a parking without introducing some kind of narrowing. You're just going to widen the road and induce speeding. So that's why there was a need to integrate the implementation of a bike path, and also because our traffic study, as we spoke about recently, raised the issue of inadequate accessibility for cycling infrastructure. And the other option was the introduction of one-ways. And among the 3 options, the introduction of the one-way was the least disruptive. And so now moving on to the collaboration that we had at Polytechnique. It was part of an internship from 2024 to 2025. And the mandate that we had with Polytechnique is for them to build a prediction model to detect areas that are hazardous, so that the city could gain knowledge and know where to intervene. And I'll go into a little bit more detail a little bit later, but this is just a high-level introduction. The team contributors in this case were Owen Waygood, who's a university professor at Polytechnique, Shabnam Abdohali, who is a postdoctorate student, PhD, also at Polytechnique. And we also had Sally Salaba, who was a master's research student. And there was Sawade Farnez, who also did some work with us to help give us insights for the territory. And in total, there was a total of 4 postdoctoral doctorate research projects and 4 master's research projects. I'm not going to go into detail in each project, just those that are most applicable to the project that we're discussing this evening. And I'm not going to be able to go into all details, of course, because as I was explaining a little bit earlier, we could spend an hour or 2 or even more on each. And in fact, each one of these, and in some cases, like in the case of Sally Salaba, there was a master's thesis that was done exclusively on safety in the city of Westmount. So again, we're doing more high level and just the main takeaways. And of course, we also had 10 workshops with experts from around the continent, including local stakeholders like people from public security and people like myself and other people from Westmount. There were also researchers from the US and across Canada that contributed. And the reason for that is because we want to make sure we're not applying a biased approach. And so the models were really built in a fashion that was unbiased in that sense. Moving on, one of the first mandates that was asked by the Polytechnic was to do a crash analysis or collision analysis. And what you see on your screen to the left is a mapping of the pedestrian collisions from 2012 to 2021. And what we see here is that there's a considerable number of accidents. Thank goodness there were no deaths in that period in terms of pedestrians. But what we understood from both the traffic engineering report and the Polytechnic is that overall it's an accident-prone area. And if we look to the right, we have the cyclist collisions, and what we see generally is a similar pattern. Sherbrooke, of course, comes up a lot, or is prevalent in terms of the patterns, and that's because there's more traffic and there's more crossing, of course, but it's not limited exclusively to Sherbrooke. I would like to take a moment to talk about the red dot that we see on the map, which represents a cyclist death that occurred on Forden Avenue, and the green dot that you see that happened in 2025. So maybe starting just with the green point on the map is a cyclist accident. It was a cyclist, a student from Selwyn House that was going along Chemin Côte Saint-Antoine, and it's relatively recent. So it was striking for me as a city employee that that there are children that are literally engaging in active transportation, but are at risk. And the red dot on the map, well, it's a cyclist death. The cyclist was going down on Forden Avenue, and wasn't a student of the area. From what we know, it was a student of not Poly, but Université de Montréal, I believe. And they were just traveling down on Forden. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because the road profile that we saw on Forden prior to its reconstruction, it was recently reconstructed, was a similar profile to what we see now, or what we're looking at tonight. And that's the one that we saw earlier, where there's just not enough space in what we're doing. And so one of the comments that one of the engineers that did the site visit said is that when there's a parked vehicle, the cyclist has to sometimes go on oncoming traffic because there's just not enough space. So for me, that was alarming, because although we're not drawing conclusions or we're saying that it was directly related, because we don't know, we weren't there, there are symptoms that we see there that are related to a cyclist death, indirectly or directly, that could be reproduced on other streets in school zones. So for me, that was alarming. I think there's a lesson to be learned there, and a caution, or it should give us pause, that we should be concerned with in terms of road safety. And so the reason we brought the Polytechnic in was primarily so that we could build us prediction models. And they refer to these prediction models as MCDA, or multi-criteria decision aiding. What the MCDA model is a alternative to the traditional approach. So in the previous slide, you saw collision analysis. So historically or traditionally, some traffic practitioners would intervene based on the history of traffic accidents. So you'd see there's a black area. They used to call it black dots, and then if you would see certain areas where it's heavier in accidents, that's where you prioritize your intervention. But unfortunately, in the case of pedestrians, and especially vulnerable pedestrians and cyclists like school children, it could be too late. We don't want to wait until an accident or a tragedy happens. So we want tools that are more proactive. And this is what the MCDA proposes, or at least the MCDA applied to road traffic prediction models. And so when I discovered that the Polytechnique had developed a tool using this, and by the way, the Polytechnique, Owen, Waygood, and Shabnam, who are here tonight, they are the first ones to have implemented this model using the Macbeth approach, which is a technical term I don't understand, but they could explain a little bit more about it. But so it's a novel approach. It's not meant to replace traditional measures, but it's meant to complement it, and it's meant to validate what we're doing is correct. And so there were three models that were built for the city. One of them was part of Sally Salaba's master's research project. We're not going to go into that one today, and we're not going to delve into the details of Shabnam's work either. So the two other MCDA models were developed by Shabnam's doctorate research. So we're not going to go into details about it, but we're going to look at it briefly to see what the results show. And I hope you the viewers are able to see. There's a lot of information in there. But again, I just want to turn your attention to the main takeaways. So on the left side, we have the segment model, and on the right side, we have the intersection model. So implicitly, there were two models that were designed, one for the segment model and then one for the intersection model. And because in the world of traffic and traffic safety and school zone safety, we're concerned not only with the segment, but also at the intersection. And because they're two different phenomenons, the models are separate. That said, the segment model does feed in as an input to the intersection model. And I think the big takeaway here is that, and if you look at the legend at the far bottom, blue is the safest and green is acceptable. Orange is somewhat hazardous, red is hazardous, and dark brown is very hazardous. And generally what we see is that there's an improvement. So what you see on the first line is the existing situation for Metcalfe. For example, if we look at the existing situation for Metcalfe or actuel, we see certain areas. If we look at the far right, we see hazard score. So this is the main indicator that you want to look for. So to the left, between heavy vehicle traffic characteristics, traffic calming, visibility, land use, and geometrics, these are criteria that are inputted in the model. And the total, or what the criteria that we're looking for, the output is the hazard score. So basically, we're measuring the hazard. So the first line, again, for Metcalfe Avenue is the existing, or l'actuel. And so we see that we have a score of 3,828. And in the projected, or with our project proposal that we're presenting today, it improves the hazard score to 326. So if we look at all streets that we're speaking about tonight, if I refer back to the map we've seen earlier, we're speaking about Metcalfe Avenue, Kensington Avenue, and Argyle Avenue. And with the proposal that we're bringing forward tonight, we see an improvement in all cases, at both the intersection level and the segment level. This is more the takeaway that we're looking for. And again, there's a lot of details in this. There's a lot of nuances. Not all models are perfect. It remains a model, but there's definitely more information that will be posted on the city's project page that you could consult and get familiar with if you have more questions and concerns. And moving on, I just wanted, because there were a few questions to ask us what the city has done or has done so far before moving to the measures that we're going to propose tonight. And I think it's worth taking the time to say that we did try a lot of things. I've been at the city for 12 years. I've been engaging with the schools and public security. I must say, if they're here tonight, I have to thank them immensely because they're really on the ground almost every day. They can't be at all the schools. We have 13 schools in the city of Westmount, but they're there every day. We're discussing with the teachers, the directors, the principals, and we're always engaging with them, seeing if they could tweak the drop off here, they could stagger it. So we're always engaging with schools in that level. But other than that, to address some of the symptoms I spoke about earlier, if we look at the screen in front of you, we could look at Montrose, for example. To address the curb hopping, we put temporary bollards along the sidewalk so that we could discourage motorists from curb hopping, driving on the sidewalk. But as you can see in the bottom picture, they don't last very long. They get run over. People know, and there's a lot of maintenance associated with it. So it's a little bit more of a band-aid solution. It doesn't really address the fundamental of the problem. We also implemented school corridor signs. So in 2017, I believe we plastered the city with a corridor sign. So the more yellow fluorescent we put it, the more we sensitize motorists. In 2022, we put what I'm going to refer to as début fin zone scolaire. So the MTQ developed or implemented a new norm and a new highway safety code regulation that allows police to double the fines in school zones. That was a pretty big project because we had to change all our school zone signs. They had to be very clearly identified. And what we also did was we also tried a lot of turn restrictions, which is sometimes an alternative to measures like one-ways, because we prevent motorists. So the street kind of becomes a de facto, or we could call a fake one-way for certain hours of the day. We've also installed a lot of signage. We have also did a lot of line painting. As you can see in the photo at the top right, this is on Metcalfe Avenue. There's something like 4 or 5 U-turn signs. So I think the number of signs is indicative of the fact that, when one sign didn't work, we put 2, 3, and 4 signs. It's a little bit indicative that we've tried signage, we've tried lighter measures. And other things that other things that we've done also is every year we do a back to school campaign. We started it mainly in 2018 with an intense rollout of bollards all over the city and chloroplast signs. But we're also experimenting with the Rue École, and we did a pilot project with the study on the boulevard for Brayside Avenue, and we did the school street there. We're constantly monitoring, we're constantly consulting with schools, and we're exploring the possibility of photo radar. And with this Safe Routes to School project that we're presenting today, we're going deeper than that, and we're even partnering with schools so that they have a sense of engagement, really, and then for better success. So really, I think that the message is that we feel that we've tried a lot of things to arrive at the point we're at today. And so just a little bit of summary of what we spoke about. So I've explained a little bit, I've done the introduction, I've explained the problems that were raised and the evaluation that we did. I've explained a little bit more of the context, the studies that we did. And I think the conclusion that we've come to as a city and the experts as well that participated in the studies is that the status quo is no longer acceptable. And not only is it no longer acceptable, I think that the lighter measures are not sufficient. We've tried them, and I think we're at a point where there's more of a need for structural change. And so that's where the project itself comes into play, which I'm going to present to you now. So in front of your screen, you see the project area. Again, we have and here we're introducing the one-ways. We're showing you the direction of the one-ways, and we're illustrating a summary of where the measures are targeted for. And I should say, of course, that this is not an exhaustive list. You might have measures on the light blue streets that you're seeing on your screen that will be implemented, but they will be light and they won't be disruptive. Like I'm thinking more of like line painting or painting crosswalks. We're not going to necessarily produce an exhaustive list so that you could see every detail, but it's more an overview list. And we're going to focus tonight more on the measures that are more structural, of course. And I'm not going to list or pinpoint on the map because we're going to go through slide by slide, street by street. And before doing that, I just want to say a few words about the fact that we did reach out to the schools, and even though we collaborated with the schools since the beginning, since 2022, and even earlier, in the case of Akiva, we've been in direct exchange since 2018. And my colleagues at Public Security way earlier about all the problems we have around school zones. We did want to go get a formal approval or formal support from the schools in 2025 and 2026, because at that point we also applied for funding at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and we required their formal support. And of course, it helps us as a city to get that formal support. So this is just to mention that even though we have been in collaboration since the beginning, we also have a formal support for most schools in the area. The only school we didn't get a formal feedback from is École Internationale, and that's explained a little bit by the fact that they're a high school and they've taken less interest in it. Most students arrive by bus, but nonetheless, we're still in contact with them, and but just not a formal letter from that school. So again, before going on to present the slide-by-slide cutout, I just want to point to some of the different collaborators that participated more in this phase. So there's a when we decided to go through with the project, we also wanted to have a school engagement plan. So we wanted to consult the school a little bit more closely and involve even the students. And so what we did with in this case, Akiva, because Akiva was a little bit more of the pioneer school who had a lot more interest than some of the other schools, or some of the other schools that we've spoken to are not ready right now. So we might collaborate with them in a more intensive engagement plan next year or after when they're ready. So for Akiva school, we went to hire the services of Safe Mobility, who are affiliated, of course, with Polytechnique. So Shabnam, Abdohali, and Owen Waygood are part of Safe Mobility, and they're also part of Polytechnique. And we've also reached out to the Centre Écologie Urbain, who are experts in school engagement and participative activities. So the following slides are just going to briefly explain that before we go into the slide-by-slide presentation of what's changing on the ground. And so in terms of Le Centre Écologie Urbain, we did a co-design session on May 14th with Akiva, and it was really interesting, and it was a blast because we went into the classroom. It was all of grade 5, so there were 2 grade 5 classes, 34 participants in total, and we basically did a co-design session with them. We showed them the plans that we're proposing. And we've asked them, what color would you prefer? Do you prefer blue or pink? And we've also asked them, what kind of shapes would you like the city to draw into these curb extensions? So it's really a fun project that allows the city to engage with the students so that they could feel a participative element, so they could feel a sense of pride and participation, and a little bit of ownership, of course, too. And so just for a little bit of context, we're not painting the whole street. It's just a component in what we're calling curb extensions. As you can see on the screen there, in the curb extensions, there will be some concrete elements that help with the curve, the turn radius, to ensure that motorists don't step or into the crosswalk where the pedestrians are waiting to cross. And so these are the components that we're targeting for participation and implication by the school. In terms of some of the the other things that we did, the other component that we did was a focus group. So we asked the children simple questions like, do you feel you're safe in your school zone? Are there some improvements that you would recommend for the city? And without going through each of the responses, some of the interesting things that I did find is that they mentioned that it would be nice to have additional crossing guards. They mentioned that they would like to have wider sidewalks. They would also, and I found it interesting that one student said it would be nice to have a street that is safe, or a street that is safe is when a car does not go on the sidewalk. So I found that one very interesting because, and I should say that the experience of having the focus group with the children was very eye-opening for me. The children, surprisingly, are very familiar with traffic. They're very knowledgeable traffic, and it makes sense when you think about it because children don't have a driver's license, so they are de facto pedestrians and cyclists in everyday life. So it was very eye-opening for the city, and I find it's very necessary because a lot of projects implement a project, whether it's a conversion of a one-way or a major change, without consulting kids, but in reality, they're the ones that are primarily affected by this, given that they're the most vulnerable. And so now that I've explained a little bit more, that I've explained more about the engagement process, we're moving on slide by slide to what we're presenting, what we're proposing for the measures we want to implement street by street. So on your screen here, you see Argyle Avenue. And in this slide, we're just presenting the high level. And then in the next slide, we're going to present a little bit more detail because I know we had some questions that were mentioning or asking exactly what the geometry is going to look like in the chicane and whatnot. So again, as you can see by the profile of the street, we're trying to jam a lot of stuff in 8.6 to 9.6 meters. So there's just too many lanes for what we want to do. The standard that's required for what we want to put in there for 2 lanes of traffic and 2 lanes of parking is 11 to 12 meters. It just doesn't fit. So what we're proposing is a one-way that's headed southbound. We're proposing a chicane, a speed bump that would be added in front of the school. We're proposing, of course, to paint crosswalks to ensure that crosswalks are very visible. And it's important to mention that we're proposing to maintain parking year-round. In fact, the conversion of a one-way was a lot fueled by the fact that it allowed us to maintain parking and it allowed us to protect the sidewalk. So an exposed sidewalk is not always something that we strive for. And so, in addition, the conversion to one-way also allows you to clear some of the corners. So in some cases, we might gain an extra space or a half a space. And that's simply because of the fact that because there's just not enough space, in Westmount, you'll see that the corners are very, they're cleared at a significant distance specifically so that we could allow bidirectional traffic movement. Moving on to the more specifics, Argyle is interesting because the width varies. At the top part, closer to Montrose in Thornhill, it's 8.6 meters, and further below, it's 9.6 meters. And so we have to design the street based on the narrow section, or that's a major input for us is to know like the narrow section. And so from the top, we're starting, and then as you can see on the screen here, we're proposing a chicane. There was some talk that, or some concern that we would be removing parking, but according to our site visits, there's no parking at the area where we want to put the chicane. And as you can see by the photo, the chicane would be a very modest one. It's not one of those chicanes where there's two sort of, some chicanes are much more elaborate than the one we're proposing. And it's primarily line painting bollards. There may be the addition of a planter along the sidewalk, but in all cases, we're not targeting the removal of parking to implement this. Now, moving on to the bottom section of Argyle, between Chemin Côte Saint-Antoine and Sherbrooke. We're not proposing anything drastic here. It would remain bidirectional for traffic or two-way. We're just proposing to add a curb extension to the west portion so that it reduces crosswalk crossing distance for pedestrians. Moving on to Metcalfe Avenue. The image here at the bottom is a 3D rendering. It's not an accurate one. It's just to illustrate a little bit the feel of what it will look like. Again, we're proposing a one-way towards the north in this case. And the fact that we're proposing the one-way towards the north, it alleviates a lot of space so that we could, and it simplifies the traffic movements. So we're able, in this case, to implement a mid-block crosswalk. We're able to implement as well a speed hump. There are 2 crosswalks that will be shortened so that it's a shorter crossing for pedestrians. And because of the excess space that we're gaining, we're proposing as well to implement a buffer zone along the sidewalk so that it's more comfortable for parents so that when they drop off. And it also adds a component of narrowing the overall corridor, because whenever we introduce a one-way, we also want to introduce traffic calming, because the one-way in itself can widen the road or the effective traveling lane in some way. So it's important to also narrow and introduce traffic calming measures. Moving on to Kensington Avenue, we're proposing a one-way south. In this situation, as I mentioned earlier, there's a missing sidewalk on the east side. And so the introduction of the one-way would alleviate space to allow us to introduce a temporary sidewalk on the east side while maintaining parking on the east side. In this case, the west side was, in its existing configuration, it is a parking lane. Excuse me, it's not a parking lane, it's a drop-off lane. And in the proposed scenario, we're proposing to maintain it a parking lane. So we're not planning to change it. And of course, you have the decorative paint component that we've mentioned earlier, which is limited to the curb extension areas or the buffer zone that you see where the crosswalks are shortened. And in terms of other streets, on your screen now, you're looking at Clark Avenue. In this case, we're just implementing a school zone, so it's just signage and some other minor modifications, like maybe reducing the crossing distance a little bit or tightening the curve, the radius at the intersection so that it's a little bit safer for pedestrians when they're crossing. And there are other measures that we're exploring, that we're trying, and that is like installing speed displays. So a little bit more lighter measures, because we don't have the same problems on Clark as we do some of the other streets. Now for the École Saint-Léon and Miss Edgar's and Miss Cramp's school, or ECS, we're currently at a different phase with these schools. We received similar complaints, but they came in a little bit later. And so in this case, we didn't do the traffic study, and we didn't do a lot of the validation work that I've explained previously for these streets. So we're not introducing any structural or major changes for the streets in these around these schools tonight, but we are in intense conversations with the schools about change that's needed. They're sending us, as you've seen in the beginning of the presentation, there's a lot of similar problems that are happening in these schools, in these school zones as in the other schools. So there's a demand that was expressed by the schools to intervene, but we have a process that we have to follow. We want to engage with the school first to understand the problem, to see if there are certain signage optimizations we could do first, to see if we could stagger parking or we could optimize parking. But essentially, we are observing on the ground similar issues. So there is a need to address it and study it relatively in a priority fashion. And other things that we're looking at medium term, which is applicable to the schools of Saint-Léon and ECS, but also applicable to the other schools along Sherbrooke or touching Sherbrooke, is that we want to introduce pedestrian signals, pedestrian crossing signals in certain areas like Kensington and Redfern. There aren't any. So I mean, this is a need in our opinion, and so this is something we want to introduce as well. In terms of traffic impacts, according to the model simulations that were done by the traffic engineer, we're expecting negligible impacts In some different scenarios that are presented in the traffic study, the impact was a lot more significant. But in the scenario that we're implementing, or that we're recommending to move forward with, is the scenario we're calling scenario number 4, which includes just the streets that you've seen on your screen this evening: Metcalfe, Kensington, and Argyle, the one-way conversions. And in that scenario, the traffic impacts were relatively negligible. The only degradation that we saw in the model was at the intersection of Sherbrooke and Clark. And if you look at your screen here on the left, we have the different level of service, which is a little bit of traffic engineer jargon, but essentially the letters are very intuitive. And as you can see on the screen, a degradation from C to D is a degradation from a 20 to 35 second wait to a 35 to 55 second wait. And I should say that this is strictly limited to the AM. So according to traffic simulations, this is the AM, so mostly in the morning. And in the world of traffic analysis, the morning is always the critical or the most impactful time, because everybody has to arrive at the same time. Whereas in the evening, some people work later, they pick up their children, they leave them at after school, or they stop at the grocery. So the departures are always more staggered. So this is understandable, or at least the results are intuitive to our understanding. Such a project is not without impact. There are certain delays. For example, a resident that might be living on Argyle Avenue, closer to the bottom, and usually would go home via Sherbrooke, would be confronted with a one-way going down, would have to change their route to go up Chemin Côte Saint-Antoine and up Churchill, or they would have to go up Clark, and they could go to Thornhill or Montrose. So in worst case scenarios, the detour time we're estimating, according to the traffic study, is 1 to 3 minutes. And we understand that this is an inconvenience and a change, but this is an impact that will be felt mostly by those that came by Sherbrooke. So if those of you that already came from the north, that impact might not be felt, because your commute home is already in that direction. But we understand that it's not a project without impact on residents, and we're very sensitive to that. And that's one of the reasons why I think it was recommended to go with scenario 4, because it had a balanced impact on residents. So in terms of a summary of the measures, in school zones, we're recommending 3 targeted street corridors that are converted to one-way. 1 quick build sidewalk on Kensington, as we mentioned. In 2026, a school zone without a sidewalk is unheard of, so we're very keen on that measure. Several crosswalks that are shortened, so that they could shorten the crossing distance for pedestrians. 1 mid-block crosswalk on Metcalfe, 2 speed humps, 1 on Metcalfe and 1 on Argyle, and 1 added school zone. And on the route to school, or just other measures that we are exploring, is park and stride zones. Other corners that we might explore to implement shorter crossing distances or virtual curb extensions. In all cases, I should say that these measures wouldn't remove parking. We would work with what's existing. So it's an optimization measure. It's not we wouldn't qualify it as a heavy measure or a more structural measure. Pedestrian crossing signals, as I mentioned earlier. And we're continuing to exchange with the schools to see what we can improve beyond signage or beyond measures that we might introduce. We're in a continuous conversation with the schools to see what can be done on their level in terms of managing dismissal and arrival. And maybe just a word about park and stride here. Some of the parents that might be in attendance tonight might have seen the parent survey that we sent to participate in schools. Park and stride is essentially a measure where we add additional drop-off zones that are satellite, or that are maybe 200 to 300 meters away from the school. And so earlier in the presentation, I said, even though some parents might live very far and don't have the possibility to send their children walking or biking to school, Park and Stride allows you to drop your kids off at a little bit more of a distance so that it reduces the congestion directly in the school zone. And at the same time, the city is going to secure those. So the route that's from the Park and Stride drop off to the school will be extra safer. We're going to implement extra measures to ensure that it's safe. We should do it on all school routes or on all streets, but we're going to pay a particular attention to those routes, and so that it could be a safe route to school. And in terms of concluding remarks, if we take a look back at what we've spoken about tonight, what we have is an area with a lot of students. There's approximately 2,800 students. It's an active mobility hub. As we said earlier, there's bike paths, there's Bixi stations, there's students that are walking around, but there's also a lot of friction. There's a lot of danger created by conflict. There's sidewalks that are exposed and it's causing curb hopping and a lot of dangerous maneuvers. But there's also a lot of action going on. There's a lot of traffic. There's emergency service. So what we come to when we look at it, and we take a step back and we look at it, is that there's a competition for space that's happening in front of our eyes. And it's a competition between vulnerable road users, school children, vulnerable users in terms, not only school children, but also cyclists. There's bike paths, like I said earlier. And what we've come to the conclusion as a city is that it's an accident waiting to happen. There has been accidents. There has been a death. It's time for the city to intervene with more structural measures. And of course, there's a right way to do a one-way. We are cognizant of the fact that the one-way is it's a heavier measure than the lighter measures that we've tried in the past. We realize that it's disruptive for some residents, and some residents more than others. And it might even be disruptive in some ways for parents, but we believe in the approach that we applied in this project is that there's a right way to do a one-way. I was speaking to this week to somebody at the city of Montreal in Ville-Marie, where they implemented one-ways in a very reactionary way following the tragic death of Maria, who some of you may know was the schoolgirl in 2022 who tragically died on her walk to school because a motorist ran over the pedestrian, the child, and it was a hit and run in this case. And in this particular instance, the city of Montreal implemented a series of one-ways a little bit all over the place. But when I spoke to the city of Montreal, they said that the way that they implemented was a little bit more drastic. What we're doing in this project is we're doing a more balanced approach. We're targeting certain areas where there's reported problems, and it's not an area-wide systematic introduction of one-ways. And we don't necessarily think either that one-ways are the solution for every street. But in this particular case, we do. This is one of the last slides. After presenting to you the project in itself, we just want to give you a few points of the next steps. So on June 19th, we're planning a participative event with the school, where Akiva School is actually we're going to have students come out in the street, in a safe area, of course, in the street, and they're going to actually paint some of the concrete slabs that we were referring to previously. And it's going to make it an enjoyable and fun event for them. This is something that was planned as part of our school engagement plan. And so in terms of the actual work for the one-ways and the introduction of the signage, July is going to mark the start of a lot of the prep work. So some signage work is going to start, and the blue collars are going to start preparing, the signs. And in early August, we're going to start the work in terms of line painting and in terms of bollards, and some of the planters are going to be brought in. And the official date itself is going to be mid-August. When we introduce a one-way in a school zone, we want it to be introduced before, so at least 2 weeks before school starts, so we could make sure everything is operating okay, everything is functional and safe. And then, of course, beyond that, we're going to be doing a period of monitoring for a year. With every project like this, change there are some things that we might overlook, and so the monitoring aspect is going to be important for us. Throughout the project, we're going to be monitoring. We're going to be doing traffic counts. We're going to put radars on site so that we can measure speeds before. We've already done it before, so we're going to do it after, and then we could compare before and after. And then, of course, ongoing, we're continuing to partner with the schools and exchange and a dialogue with the schools. So with that, it concludes the presentation. I wanted to just take the opportunity to thank everyone who participated in this project, the schools, Akiva School, Susanna at Akiva School was an immense contributor. And we all know how school resources are very limited, especially these days. And then for them to be giving a lot of their time for us as a city, it's very appreciative, and it really helped to better the project, really. Thank you also to Saint Leon, ECS School, Selwyn House, and thank you for all the partners, really, Polytechnique, Safe Mobility, Intervia, the Centre Écologie Urbain. Also, thank you to Public Security, the fire station, who we've presented these scenarios to, and who they've commended us on this. They're frequently talking about. They frequently reported to us challenges that they were having as well, and of course the police. So thank you very much, all the contributors, and the partners for having supported us and helping us along the way. And at this point, I'm going to pass the speaking stick to my colleague Stacy. We are going to engage in the question and answer period so that we could address some of your concerns. As I understand it, we've got a lot of questions throughout the past weeks, but I think we also got a number of questions this evening in the chat. And I believe what our intention was to do is to select a few questions that were front and center, that addressed some of the major concerns that we wanted to get out to the gate and address right away. And so I'm going to pass the speaking stick back to you, Stacy.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Merci beaucoup pour ta présentation. Donc, je vous rappelle que cette présentation sera disponible sur la page du portail citoyen de la ville de Westmount. So this presentation will be available on the citizen portal of the city of Westmount. Donc, nous passons maintenant à la période de questions. So we will now move to the question and answer period. As many of you are joining us today, and we have already received a large number of questions, we unfortunately won't be able to answer every question live. But the way we will proceed, like I mentioned earlier, so that we will have different type of response. Some questions were already been answered in the chat. I'm sorry, in the Q&A box, not the chat, the Q&A box. So you've been receiving a few responses from your questions, while other questions will be answered out loud, either by my colleague, Jonathan, for example, or with our specialists, if need be. But nothing will be lost. Don't be afraid. We will be able to answer to your questions, or we will share you the answers. We will have a summary, frequently asked questions covering the key topics of the response, and will be prepared and made available after the event in a couple of days. And also, let's not forget that you'll be able to ask additional questions after this public session, again, with our Engagement Citizens page at the city portal of Westmount. So now, to guide the question period, I will now hand things over to my colleague, our Director of Communications, Mr. Mugisha Rutishisha. Mugisha, je te cède la parole.
Merci, Stacy. Thank you very much. So yes, like Stacy mentioned again, thank you for your engagement and thoughtful questions. So far, I received over 70 questions, I think, this evening. So the project team here is trying their best to type their answer live. So they're working very hard. Like Stacy mentioned, while we would love to address every point, every question, we have to focus on the selection of questions to ensure that the answer remains clear and helpful. And Again, a comprehensive Q&A document will be on the project page shortly. So thank you again for your patience. So for the question that I will read and ask out loud, I'll start with a selection of 3 questions that we received prior to this information session. Those are questions I hope will also help to answer other similar questions. So the first one is, could you explain the main objective of this project? Why is it so important for the city? And what does the council hope to achieve through these changes? So I would ask Councillor Chomsky or Councillor Shami if you want to share a few element of answers for that question regarding the objective of the project. You can open your mic, Councillor Chomsky or Councillor Shami.
Jonathan, you want to start and then I can follow you, or I can go first?
Sure. I can make. First of all, thank you, Jonathan Auger, for that very extensive presentation, very informative. I also will note, just in terms of the question and answer format, as Mugisha had mentioned, there are questions that are in the queue to be processed. There are questions that have been answered as well, which explains some people have asked questions, asking where their questions are, that they only see a certain number of questions, and they feel that not all the questions have been published. They are in the process of being treated. I just want to start off with that comment. I think overall, in terms of objectives, we as a city of Westmount live in a very small, roughly 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer territory, and we have 13 schools in that area. And overall, I think it is important to improve safety and comfort of travel in school zones, and to encourage children to be able to go to school in a way that they perceive and their parents perceive as safe. Everyone agrees, I think, that there are problems on the streets that we have identified for this proposal. There is many different opinions on how to proceed and how to best reach the goals. But I think that there is generally wide consensus that we have reached a point where the city needs to act, and we want to do so preemptively and not responsibly. Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Chomsky. And I also want to shout out to the team of professionals and academics that have helped us with these studies. Listen, your question, and I've received a lot of calls. We're very honest. This is change is not easy, but tough decisions for the safety of our kids, for the safety of children. There was a horrible accident, ladies and gentlemen, of a young 7-year-old was it Mile End, Jonathan? Where was it in Montreal? It was a tragic, avoidable school accident. 100 meters from the front door of a school, a child was hit by a car and died. This is an obligation of all of us elected officials to represent all of you to make the right decisions. Not easy. These studies show us that we have to be safer. The vulnerable community needs to be properly, we need to bring in the proper, best evidence-based research to make it safer and better. It's not easy, these decisions. There is inconvenience. There will be folks not pleased. We hear you. I hear you. I'm your representative. In 4 years, 3 years, you can get rid of me. That is your right. That's democracy. But what we have to do is we have to listen, and we're here for 3 years. The city has been studying, more than 3 years. Monsieur Auger, il a mentionné à peu près une dizaine d'années des études, des recommandations. The police, public security, the schools, the residents, the parents, the teachers, all the folks, the owners of homes. And you saw those pictures. Ladies and gentlemen, change is required. And it's our obligation to provide you with the best evidence-based research and care, and that's what we're doing. Things can still, we hear you. We know it's not easy, but it's the right thing to do for the safety of our children.
Thank you, Councillor Chomsky and Councillor Chamy, for your answers. So the second question we received prior to this session, I believe Jonathan Auger might have touched on it in this presentation, but and I think it's a very important question. I'll just read it to you as it came. Are we losing parking on Argyle, Kensington, and Metcalfe? Jonathan, again, if you can just answer that question. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah, and as you said, I did mention it along the way during the presentation, and indeed, one of the advantages of this proposal for Argyle is that we can actually gain parking, not only at the corners. As I mentioned in the presentation, we could gain parking by optimizing the corners because the one-way alleviates the friction at the intersection. So it allows you to gain, in some cases, a little bit of space there. But most importantly, in the current or the existing situation, we remove parking in the winter. There's what we call a winter restriction on Argyle. Introducing the one-way would allow us to keep the parking there year-round, just no more winter restriction. And I would take this opportunity to also mention that we do have some residents that say, well, that's a little bit difficult for some residents, specifically in the wintertime, because there are a number of residents on Argyle that don't have off-street parking. They don't have parking aprons. So when Public Works put the no parking signs, well, you're left with zero sides of the street to park. So in our view, the one-way was very win-win for that. And of course, in terms of safety, which is our primary concern, well, there's that protective element. It reduces the width of the laneway as well, or it keeps that the laneway narrow, relatively speaking, so that it could reduce speeds as well. So yes, to answer the question, there might be a few instances where, because there's a crosswalk, I'm thinking a little bit more about Metcalfe Avenue or Kensington, where the position of the posts might, so we cannot say that there will be 0 feet loss of parking, but overall, there's a gain. There's a gain of parking.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Merci, Jonathan. Si tu veux prendre un verre d'eau, c'est le moment parce que les autres questions aussi, c'est pour toi. As one of our resident experts, I have other questions for you, so brace yourself. So the next one, I'm going to read it to you. It's very short, straightforward. Why not a one-way the other way? Any answer for that, Jonathan?
Yeah. So the direction of the one-way was something that we asked different experts as well. Initially, our intuition told us that a one-way south was more beneficial for a number of reasons. But the primary reason is that it's always recommended to drop off the passenger on the passenger side. And because of the position of the schools, the one-ways were primarily recommended in that direction to facilitate and encourage drop-off on the right-hand side, where the children drop or I don't want to say release there, but or the children are exit the vehicle. So having the one-way, so that was the primary motivator. The other motivator in the case for Argyle, for example, is that well, according to our traffic study, the number or the volume of traffic headed north in the morning is excessive for a residential street. So there's an opportunity there that if you were to put a one-way north, you might facilitate that. What we could expect is through traffic. So the one-way south sort of stifles a little bit what we think is through traffic, or people just transiting the area to maybe get to the boulevard. And so it's a traffic calming component that's beneficial not only for the school, but also residents, in our opinion. It's a calming measure as well to have it in that direction in most cases. In the case of Argyle, sorry, I should say. But in general, that was the primary motivator for choosing the direction of the one-ways. And if you think of Argyle Avenue, for example, if you were to put it one way north, well, then you would encourage parents to drop off on the right-hand side, and then you'd have children crossing mid-block, which that would be introducing an additional hazard or risk factor. So the one-ways were primarily fueled by safety, of course.
Thank you, Jonathan. Merci, Jonathan. Another question related to the process I have here. Actually, this one came live during our information session, so I'm going to read that to you. I was surprised to see no changes at Kitchener and Sherbrooke. I understand that intersection is a source of concern to many parents at Saint-Léon. Did Westmount receive feedback from Saint-Léon about that intersection? I didn't see their feedback on the project page. Jonathan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we've been in contact with Saint-Léon. We've actually went on site with Intervia to meet with the principal. We had a meeting. But Saint-Léon, the important thing to note is that we're in a different stage in the process. And it's worth maybe mentioning too that we had a master's student do her thesis specifically in collaboration with Saint-Léon. So there were two parallel processes that were engaged at the same time. And initially, the thought process for the city was that, well, the master's student would propose measures that would address the concerns for Saint-Léon, and that the Safe Routes to School project would be focused more on the north of Sherbrooke problem. And since then, even since 2025, we included Saint-Léon in the Safe Routes to School process. And it's just a matter of sequencing too. The schools, ECS, Akiva, and Selwyn House, the parents of those schools and the principals of those schools have been addressing their concerns to us a little bit earlier. So that explains why it was triggered, and we're a little bit further in the process. But we're definitely not neglecting Kitchener and Sherbrooke. I didn't speak to the feedback that we received, but we do have feedback from the school itself. We have feedback from in terms of focus groups that we did with them. We're just at a different stage yet at this point. We're more in the phase of engagement with the school to see if certain optimizations could happen. We're in the phase of what I've referred to in the beginning as lighter measures, because the thing is that we cannot introduce a structural measure or a heavier measure from one day to the next. We have to go through a traffic analysis, a safety analysis. We have to make sure we do our due diligence, and we also have to ensure that it addresses the solution. So to answer your question, we're just at a different phase, but we're in constant communication, and Saint-Léon is a high priority at the moment. And so we expect that, and maybe just a little bit of additional information on that. Our consultant that's here tonight, Intervia Pascal Breton, has the mandate. So we have a budget that's set aside to study the area and propose solutions. So we're actively engaged. It's high priority. It's the top of our priority.
And quickly, another question: why not focus solution directly around the school instead of directing heavy artery school traffic into primarily residential region? That's what's written on the question. Residential region not designed to accept all this through traffic.
So if I understand the question correctly, it's about the traffic impact that will be displaced on other streets.
Yes, why not focus solution directly around the school instead of directing the traffic, heavy artery school traffic into residential area, not designed to accept that amount of traffic, I guess.
Yeah. Well, so the implementation or the measures that we're planning to implement are not without consequences. This is true. But what we're saying is that we have to take a decision in terms of which streets are priority. And the measures that we're proposing are directly the heavier measures or the more structural measures, the one-way reconfigurations and shortening of the crosswalks are directly in the school zones of the streets that on the streets that are the most problematic, the ones that we receive the most complaints or concerns, the ones that we've documented as being problematic. And so those really are the areas where we're intervening. But indeed, if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's not without impact on other streets. So we're taking a little bit of traffic off of Argyle, and then they have to reroute. So implicitly, there's going to be some people that are going to want to change their habits. They're going to drop off maybe on Côte Saint-Antoine. Some might want to go around and go up Clark, and turn on Thornhill, or Churchill, turn on Thornhill. But because there's distance, you know, there's approximately 800 meters. Like if we take Clark Avenue, for example, in the world of traffic, we call that in French magasinage. There, and in English, it's a stock space. There's road space to cater to it. So we're not expecting there to be line up of parents up Clark, but it's expected that, especially in September, but in all school zones in the month of September, it's going to be chaotic. But that's every year, and then after a while, people, like maybe in October, you'll see that patterns people will change their habits, and things should settle themselves. But it's for sure that the measures that we're proposing are not without impact on residential streets. But what we're saying is that, and we're not going to turn a blind eye to those residential streets. For example, right now I'm constantly in contact with some residents on Clark Avenue, and that's why we presented Clark Avenue with some measures on Clark Avenue. The issue with Clark Avenue is that there's a variable geometry problem there as well too. We have a winter restriction on one side, so whatever you implement, it can only be seasonal, and we're limited by space because we have a similar issue. There's friction. And so we're a little bit limited in terms of options, but we're constantly looking for appropriate solutions. And this is all part, and this will also be addressed in the monitoring phase. So if we see that there's a problem developing and there's a little bit of backup, well, we're expecting the budget and the possibility to adjust the traffic light on Sherbrooke and Clark, or on Clark and the Boulevard, so that it could alleviate a little bit. But there's an adjustment period and there's a monitoring period. So we need to take the time as well and to monitor it, to see if it's warranted.
Thank you, Jonathan. I asked for a short answer, but I think it was good that you went into the details. Thank you. Actually, the person who asked this question also asked a second question. I think is very important because it touched on the responsibility of a major stakeholder in this project, which are the schools themselves. What are they doing? So I'm going to read you the question because a lot of questions are around the same topic. The question is, why not have the school find their own attendees who are breaking traffic safety rules, or restrict both sides of parking in front of the school 10 times per week, and not inconvenience many taxpayers in Westmount by pushing traffic into small surrounding roads? So we have a lot of questions asking why the school don't do more to fix that problem. So if you can give a general answer to that, and also Councillor Chamy, Councillor Chomsky, if you want to chime in as well, I think that'll be good. Thank you.
I could start, and then if any others around the table want to add in. So as I've said in the beginning, having worked with the schools since the beginning, since I started working in the city of Westmount, we've tried different measures and we've proposed different measures. But what I've noticed, and what I will say, is that schools have a lot of challenges with resources. They'll often, we've asked them to send newsletters to parents reminding them that they shouldn't park in this way, in this manner, and to try to stagger drop off. And in some cases, the schools tried. And in the case of the schools that we're speaking about tonight, this was a discussion at various points. But what we understand as a city as well is that those options are generally not structural and not sufficient. And in addition, they're not something we could bank on every year because, as you may know, the resources that schools have these days are very tight, and they don't always have the staff to have monitors on Clark, monitors on Kitchener. We're asking for it, monitors on Kensington, monitors on Kitchener, excuse me, in the case of Kiva on Metcalfe. And so whenever you do a staggered drop-off or displaced drop-off in space, you're doubling in some way the resources you're required by the school because you have different entrances, different doors. And so we understand that that's a complicated issue. But beyond the fact that it's complicated, it's also not a lasting measure. And it's not only, and the problem, as I've illustrated in the beginning of the presentation, it's not only a school problem, it's also a contractor problem, it's a through traffic problem. It's in some cases might be residents that are driving in that manner as well on sidewalks, and essentially it's the built environment that is as such that you're inviting conflict. And I don't want to say that there's not a context and a place for it. There are some streets where it's appropriate to have a high friction traffic, but it's not in school zones. And so to answer the question, we've tried those things, but they're not always effective. They're sometimes a light measure or a band-aid solution, and they don't address the problem, outside of school peak hours.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. So I'm going to continue with the next question, and I guess this one is. Oh, sorry, Councillor Chamy, Councillor Chomsky, did you want to add something more to this answer?
Yeah, I can jump in. I want to say that these measures that we are proposing are going to have an impact on the neighborhood and surrounding streets, and therefore that change must also be shared with our school partners. And the schools have a role to play. Many have implemented measures. Many can be doing a better job. And I think that there is an enforcement element of this. I think public security will need to be more present in the rollout timeframe in end of August and September, and the SPVM has a role to play as well in terms of enforcement. But it's the city's responsibility to ensure the streets themselves are designed and operated as safely as possible. This isn't a choice between school measures and street measures. Both are important and both have to work together.
Thank you, Councillor Chomsky. Okay, so I'm going to move on with the next question, and I'm going to read it as it came today. This one is also regarding the process. It's so here it goes. On what basis has the city bureaucracy appointed itself as entitled to inconvenience the majority of city residents in order to protect what it has self-servingly characterized as the most vulnerable, underquote, the most vulnerable? This is ridiculous. We live in a representative democracy, not a benevolent dictatorship. And I expect council to meaningfully consult residents before they make these kind of changes, which were never campaigned on by anyone, but which are being put in place by unaccountable bureaucrats. Councillor Chamy, Councillor Chomsky, do you want to answer this question, comments?
Councillor Chomsky, you want to start and then I'll finish?
Sure. I guess my first comment will be that for some of the people that I see who are asking in the chat, in the Q&A, that we're filtering and not reading all of the questions, I think that one speaks for itself. In terms of the question itself, I understand that residents feel they should have a role in the greater role in the development of this project. Ultimately, decisions about public streets are made by elected officials based on recommendations from our professional staff, our experts, and the broader public interest. That's the model of representative democracy that municipalities operate under. In this case, the project is intended to improve safety around schools for the approximate 2,500 students who travel through this area. Residents are an important part of that discussion, but council also has the responsibility to consider parents, students, pedestrians, cyclists, and the community as a whole. Reasonable people will disagree on a set of facts and the proposed measures. Our role as council is to review all of the information at hand, to listen to feedback. There's a lot of comments that I see, many questions about winter conditions. These are important questions and will be answered either live or in the Q&A following up. There's a very important role for residents to play and ask questions. And overall, we're here to serve the broader public interest. This isn't a Metcalfe project. This isn't a Kensington project. This isn't an Argyle project. It's not a Montrose project. It's not a Thornhill project. It's not a Fordham project. This is a network-wide city undertaking to improve the safety for our children going to school in the city of Westmount. Jeff?
Thank you. Just to add my voice to Councillor Chomsky, that was very well said. But to the writer of that question, I may not agree with you, but I respect you. I respect your being upset with us. But at the same time, I listened to some of the points that Councillor Chomsky just raised. And it brings me back, ladies and gentlemen, the safety of our children, of this vulnerable population, is our utmost responsibility. And yes, you may not like the process, sir, or ma'am, whoever wrote that. I'm sorry, I can't, my technology, I don't even see the name, and I apologize. And I think Jonathan raised a good point. Those folks that have written questions, and you may not see them, I know this administration and that we care. We're going to answer. We're going to get back to everybody with answers. And at the end of the day, we are making the right decision based on the information, the best evidence-based research and information. Now, it may, after we tweak it, Monsieur Auger, il a expliqué que on va faire des études. We will keep going and studying, and maybe it needs to be tweaked, and maybe the test when we try these changes, they need to be tweaked, and we'll listen to you and we'll hear you. That's the way. We are a population of 20,000 people living in 4 square kilometers, landlocked in a big metropolis called Montreal, and our wonderful little city of Westmount on a mountain with up and down big roads and salt and snow. And so there's so many factors. We have to address the big elephant in the room, and we have to make it better. And this change will make it better. And maybe we have to keep tweaking. And that's our job. That's the job of your elected officials. And I'm honored and privileged to represent you. And that's democracy.
Thank you, Councillor Chomsky and Councillor Chami. The next question, maybe for this one, I'll ask Jonathan Auger and perhaps our Senior Director for Land Management, and Mr. Flees, to answer. So I'm going to read the question for you. It's, I attended the City Council meeting last week and asked/begged the mayor to change this information session into a true two-way dialogue. Why did the city refuse to conduct such an interactive session? This format does not encourage a meaningful dialogue. So Jonathan or Tom, if you want to say a few words regarding the choice of this format and what led to it. Thank you.
All right, well, Jonathan, I can start. Yes, so the decision to hold a virtual meeting was made in order to maximize the participation and the accessibility for this issue, or for this consultation, information session rather, and we wanted to ensure that we have a way of really reaching and better tracking the discussions. And today we see that we have a pretty high amount of questions. So we're actually trying really to answer some of those in writing at the same time then going through the verbal answers. So that was the decision that was made. And I think it's a good tool that helps us actually to address the discussions, I think, in the best format possible. Past experiences has shown as well that it's very, very hard to have an in-person meeting and have this effective dialogue that people are looking for. Often we have issues with regards to just seeing the information on the screen, hearing in the room the information clearly. Some people are don't leave enough time for us to answer. So it's just a better format, we feel, and it doesn't preclude anyone from being heard. I believe to the contrary. I think the city is open and will continue to listen. Residents have many ways of engaging with their elected officials and the administration. I mean, there's direct correspondences. We have received quite a lot of questions, quite a lot of comments. You've been present at council meetings and during the question period. So it is an important part of the democratic process, and I think it is indeed effective. Jonathan,
yeah, I don't have my response would be in line with yours. We're definitely not opposed. I mean, we meet on site with residents daily. And I would invite you to reach out to me, and then we could have a site visit and we could discuss some of your concerns. I'm not opposed personally to in face at any point, but as Tom was saying, and if I could add, a lot of the parents, or not a lot, but there's a considerable amount of the population, the school population, that is not necessarily in Westmount. So for them in the evening, it might not be as accessible for them to participate as well. But I think what I would like to say is we're definitely open to the feedback, and we understand that some residents will disagree, and I think that's part of a healthy democracy. Reach out, we could have a conversation, and we could see. Sometimes it could be a fine-tuned thing, but sometimes it could be a matter of doing a site visit and having a conversation about it. And sometimes it could open our eyes to something we didn't see, but at the same time, it could be the other way around too. We could both have a better understanding at the end of it.
Thank you, Jonathan. We're getting dangerously closer to 9 p.m. and we'll try to stay on time. So maybe just two more questions quickly. Yes, two questions. The first one about winter and the second one about real estate value. So I'll start with the meteorological one. I'll read you the question, Jonathan, if you want to answer that. In all the report posted on the Safe Route page, none of them address winter safety. During the winter, the person who has the question, avoid driving down Argyle because of the slippery conditions on the steep slope. I have collided with other vehicles and I have several others as well. And I've seen several others as well, sorry. I will no longer have the option to select the safer route to my home. So, Jonathan, do you want to answer this question pertaining to the winter safety?
Yes, as it pertains specifically to Argyle, or maybe a comment just about slopes, the slope terrain or topography of Westmount in general. So the measures we're proposing should also calm traffic. If you look at the current situation in the winter on Argyle, there's an exposed sidewalk. So on some level, it frees up the lane so that if there is somebody that's skidding, they could run into the sidewalk. In my opinion, that's not necessarily a safer scenario. If you have pedestrians, especially in the school zone, that's a more dangerous scenario. But what I would answer to is that the chicane that we proposed near the slope section of Argyle was done diligently. It was a modest chicane. It was approved by the traffic engineer. It was recommended initially from the traffic engineer, of course. And we even went in and we said, well, maybe we should make it a little bit more of a choke point. And if there's a need for adjustment, it could be more of a choke point. And essentially, that's kind of what it is. It's not necessarily a curve that will send a vehicle sliding. It's more of a visual cue for motorists to slow down. So to answer the question, we expect that it will reduce speeds, which will reduce the frequency of skidding or or slipper or being I'm thinking of the word in French, déraper, which is skidding. So in our opinion, the measures that we're proposing will reduce speeds, reduce those types of incidents. But again, like any measure, we're going to monitor. If there's a specific problem and a need to adjust, we're going to intervene swiftly and not we're not going to wait until an accident happens or something bad happens.
Jonathan, if I may, I just want to add, we also obviously validated with our public works team the winter snow clearing conditions and how this would be managed throughout the with the one-way conversion. So all of these things have obviously also been assessed. So and that actually works, and public works has obviously also experience on other streets with that situation. So they're definitely aware, and we have tested that with them and discussed it with them as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom. So the last question regarding real estate value, Jonathan ou Tom ou even counselors, if you want to answer that. On entend beaucoup parler de la baisse de la valeur des maisons dans une rue à sens unique. Ce facteur a-t-il été pris en compte pour les habitants d'Argyle et les autres habitants de la zone? Et si c'est le cas, allez-vous les dédommager, par exemple, en réduisant leurs impôts, leurs taxes foncières? Jonathan, Tom, Councillor Chomsky, or Councillor Chamy, if you want to answer this.
I could take a crack at it. Of course, we're not experts in. We're more in the domain of safety and traffic, but generally speaking, from what we know from the literature, in terms of the transportation literature, that is, it suggests that when we reduce through traffic and we introduce traffic calming measures, it's generally beneficial. And I have fell upon some citations that suggest that it might actually have the opposite effect, because whenever there's an inverse relationship between traffic and so the more traffic you have, the more the value goes down. But we're proposing a scenario where we want to reduce traffic in these areas. So I don't see it in the same light, but I respect the opinion. I don't know all of the literature on it, but at first glance, we think it'll have an opposite effect as alluded to.
I'll jump in. To my knowledge, the last street in Westmount that was converted from two-way to one-way was Cedar. And I'm not aware of any data that supports a reduction in home values during that project. And likewise, my opinion is a calmer, quieter street with a more orderly flow of traffic, to me, as someone who's purchased now 2 homes in Westmount, would be an improvement to the value of the home. But again, people can look at the same set of facts and come to a different conclusion. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna push my luck and apologize again to all the team project here. Just one last question, because residents, I guess, felt that we didn't address questions from residents directly affected by these changes. So I'm just gonna read the question. So maybe if you can very shortly answer that question. Specifically, what is the plan on Thornhill, who will lose their current exit routes and be forced onto a narrow section that cannot safely handle additional traffic? Jonathan, do you have a quick answer for that? For
Are we speaking, do you have a little bit of more context on that? Or residents living on Thornhill, or residents living on Thornhill?
What is the plan for residents on Thornhill who will lose their current exit routes and be forced onto a narrow section that cannot safely handle additional traffic as a result of the plan, I suppose?
Well, for residents that are living on Thornhill itself, I think there might be two-part question or two-part answer. For residents that live on Thornhill and that park on Thornhill, they would lose the possibility to go north on Argyle, but they can go to Clark, which is not that far away. It's a slight detour in that case. if they're going southbound and going towards downtown, well, Argyle will, in the proposal, the proposed measure, Argyle is converted to a southbound. So we believe that the primary destinations for departures anyways are primarily usually towards Sherbrooke, towards centers of employment and whatnot. So we expect that it shouldn't be too disruptive in that context. Now, if we're referring to users that live on, residents that live on Thornhill, but that exit from parking lots on Argyle, perhaps, if they're headed southbound, and the concern is that there's going to be a lineup of traffic, I think it's important to note, or if the concern is either that or that they cannot go north because it's going to be a one-way south, we understand that frustration. And for some residents that live on the extremities of the one-ways, it could be either beneficial because or less impactful because they're going in that direction anyway. But for some, it might be in the opposite direction which they want to head in. But what I can say is that the project itself seeks to limit through traffic. We're cutting, in some cases, I don't have the exact numbers on hand, but the measure seeks to reduce traffic by almost half, because if you would assume that there's half going north and half going south on Argyle, well, that measure will essentially reduce the amount of unnecessary motorists that are in the area. So we don't expect there to be a lineup of people that are obstructing the road. And because of the fact that we're allowing parking year round on both sides, there should be enough space so that it's not obstructed for Thornhill residents that might park on Argyle and want to exit. And I hope that answers the question, if I understood correctly.
Thank you. Stacy, je te rends la parole. Encore une fois, désolé d'avoir un peu étiré la période des questions. Merci.
Pas de souci, Moucha, merci beaucoup. Merci, Jonathan, merci, Tom, merci à tous les intervenants. Thank you very much. Donc, c'est ce qui met fin à notre période de questions. Un rappel important, si votre question est restée sans réponse, vous aurez accès aux documents questions-réponses accessibles sur le portail citoyen de la ville de Westmount. Again, if your question wasn't answered tonight, you will get access to a document, question and answer, that will be available on the citizen portal. So to access to you go to the citizen portal, you select project, Safe Route to School, and it will be on that page. Again, your comment and your questions are really important. They help the city better understand the community's perspective on this project. You can continue to find information, follow the project updates, and share your feedbacks and ask your questions. Again, I'm repeating myself, but it's really important. Everything will be accessible on the citizen portal. Again, remember, this project, it's all about safety. So thank you, everyone, to joining us tonight, and thank you for your participation. Merci à tous et merci de votre participation. Bonne soirée. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you.